Roarit, everybody. So just to say, thank you for inviting me here tonight, and particularly to Tony, for asking me to speak. This is the first talk I've ever given about manuscript collections of the Genealogical Office. I hope it won't be the last. We shall see. So what I really wanted to talk about was, I'll talk a little bit about the development of heraldry, the development of heraldry in Ireland, and then I'm going to talk about the main record sets in the collections of the Genealogical Office. So they're generally divided into two. So there's the official records that the Ulster's Office was obliged to keep, and then there's also a series of genealogical kind of research material that sort of evolved mainly due to Sir William Beetham in the 19th century. So Mike the Knight, if any of you have children or grandchildren, you will recognise Mike the Knight. The Office of Arms was established in February 1552 by Edward VI as a means of regulating the use of heraldry in Ireland. It's now called the Office of the Chief Herald. It's the oldest office of state in Ireland. It basically continues in an unbroken line from 1552. Right, so the origins of heraldry, the practice of heraldry emerged in Western Europe in about the 12th century when knights began to use devices on their shields to identify themselves in battle and at tournaments. During the 13th century, arms began to be painted onto the knight's linen surcoats, and that's where you get the term coat of arms. Over time, arms began to be passed from father to son, and the deployment of arms evolved from being for purely martial use to civil use, particularly, say, on seals for authenticating documents. All of these developments contributed to the concept of heraldry as hereditary, and there were also developed a technical vocabulary to describe arms. By about the year 1300, there were 1,500 coats of arms in use in England, but there was no legal control over their use. In the 14th century, heralds began to make judgments where disputes of arms arose. And in the following century, specific names and titles were given to heralds. So that's where you get the Garter, King of Arms, you get the Clarenceau Herald, Norreys Herald, Lancaster Herald, and are names that are actually still in use today in the College of Arms in London. Since the right to bear arms depended on one's antecedents, the practice of heraldry became associated with genealogy, and heralds actually became genealogists, in addition to erroneous heralds. So in Ireland, heraldry was in formation at the time of the Anglo-Norman invasion, and the heraldry of Anglo-Norman Ireland developed in a similar manner to the development of heraldry in feudal Europe. And many great Norman lords held property in England and Ireland and would have used arms that originated in England. The situation in the Gaelic families was different. So warfare in Ireland didn't evolve around knights and vassals, factors which contributed to the development of heraldry in England. And Gaelic families didn't use hereditary succession, but instead they used an election system called Tánaistrí. So these factors really delayed the widespread use of heraldry among Gaelic families. This all changed in Tudor Ireland. So Henry VIII, who, when he, I suppose, became king of Ireland rather than Lord of Ireland in 1541, he attempted to, and really succeeded in establishing tried to establish a new political order. It was here we begin to see Gaelic chiefs using heraldic devices for the first time. So during the 16th century, many great Irish families, so the O'Neills, the O'Donnells, McCarthys and O'Briens, who accepted peerages as part of the policy of surrender and regrant, actually started using arms. And they also accepted the principle of lineal descent in the male line. So both of those, the surrender and regrant, and the acceptance of peerages, and also accepting the principle of lineal descent in the male line, actually helped establish heraldry among those families. So this is the first record set that I want to talk about, and it's the records of the Irish nobility. I haven't found a huge amount about them. They're actually wonderful series. So in the late 16th and early 17th century, so two Ulster kings of arms, Christopher Usher and Daniel Molyneux, began to compile records of arms in use among the Irish nobility, including Gaelic peers. So Gaelic arms are, or arms of Gaelic peers, they're often quite distinctive, and they incorporate sort of features that would be obviously Gaelic. For example, the dexter hand, dexter is right, sinister is left. The sacred tree, the salmon, the serpent, the boar, the stag, and so on. So I have a number of examples of these arms that were in use during this time. So there you see, I mean, I'm sure you all know it, it's the red hand of Hugh O'Neill. The dexter hand is a particular symbol, is representing the Celtic sun god, and also it also has a religious semblance, or a religious significance from the right hand of God. So we've two more here. So McCarthy, so you've McCarthy Moore, Earl of Clancarthy and Valentia on the left, and then you have arms granted to Charles McCarthy, Viscount Musbury and Baron of Blarney in 1639. So these arms display the Irish symbol of the stag, again very common in Irish mythology. Two other ones here, so one Irish family, one Norman. So you've O'Donnell on the left, and the hand holding the Passion Cross, again, is another symbol that's quite distinctive to Irish heraldry, or Gaelic heraldry. And then the Fitzgerald arms on the right. You'll notice that the Fitzgerald arms, the description is actually, this is what we call a blazon, so this is a description in heraldic language of the shield. It's what is it? Argent, a saltire, gules. So argent is silver, so it is represented as white. Saltire is the cross, and gules is red. The simplicity of that shape indicates that it evolved when heraldry was in formation, because it's so simple. And you'll see that heraldry has become more complex as time has gone on. I use the Fitzgerald arms quite a lot in some of them, so just look out for the argent saltire gules as you go through. Two other methods were used to check the use of arms in Ireland. So you have visitations and funeral entries. So the visitations took place between about 1568 and 1610. There are only three of them. Took place mainly in locations in the Pale, so mainly Dublin, areas around Dublin and Wexford. There's only three of them ever took place, so they recorded arms in use. And you can see the example there I have is Hoare of Harperstown in Wexford. And they actually provide quite, the narrative provides quite a lot of genealogical information about the armigers, so the people described in the visitations. Because the visitations were not hugely successful, because there were only three of them and they only covered areas really within the Pale, the next record series that the heralds took on were funeral entries. So this was a policy of recording arms of deceased armigers and their family details, so the date of death, where they were buried, who they married, and who their children were. And they're really, really interesting. So this is not arms. This is a picture from the title pages of one of the volumes from the funeral entries, and I think I really, really like that image. So this is the entry for the funeral of the Earl of Kildare from 1595. You can see the Fitzgerald arms again. So argent saltire gules displayed in a variety of ways. So you can see the shield, which you all know. The tabard is the item that looks like a dress. The pennon is the kind of pointy flag, and then you have the banner is kind of the square flag. So the I suppose depictions of the Fitzgerald arms in a variety of ways. and then the writing at the side, sorry, it's quite difficult to read, that has some genealogical information on him, about his wife and he had 2 daughters, one of whom married into the O'Donnells. More funeral entries. So some of the earlier funeral entries, very colourful, and you see drawings of funeral processions and so on. A lot of the later entries look like this. So you have multiple entries on a page, you have kind of just drawings of the arms, and then a sort of a small, kind of a short narrative about the armiger who died. The second entry on the left, you can see Right Honourable Donogh O'Brien. So again, if you look at the left-hand side of the shield, you'll see it has 3 red lines. Okay, they're the O'Brien arms, and anyone with an eagle eye will see that they look quite similar to the Royal Arms of England. And they have, that was, the O'Briens took those arms as a way of declaring their loyalty to the crown. The arms on the right-hand side of that particular shield are the Fitzgerald arms, and Donogh O'Brien is actually married to a Fitzgerald, and that's what's called impaling, where you have two arms on the same shield. You can see the entry on the bottom right-hand side is for Thomas Coakley of Tintern in Wexford, and that actually is quite a lot of information on him and his family. More coloured funeral entries, this time these are for ladies. So the one on the right-hand side is Rose Usher. Generally arms were granted and held by ladies on what they call a lozenge, which is the diamond shape. We no longer issue arms to ladies on a lozenge, but I know that they still do in the College of Arms in London, which I think is interesting. So you can see the arms on the left-hand side. Again, you can see the 3. This is the wife of the Donogh O'Brien who we met on the previous page. So you can see, I suppose, a clearer image of the 3 lines of O'Brien and the saltire, the red saltire from Fitzgerald. Then on the bottom, again, it's another lady, and the arms are Sutton and Latin. She was a Latin, her husband was a Sutton, and the arms have been impaled. Now, registered pedigrees. During the 17th century, the whole of Ireland was brought within the social and political framework of English society. Most Irish nobility and gentry attempted to adapt to this new order, but many fled to continental Europe after the Cromwellian and Williamite confiscations. For these Irish families, evidence of their gentle or noble status was critical for advancement in their new homelands. In the 18th century France, degrees of nobility were rigidly fixed, and all but the highest ranks were excluded from court. Proof was required that a candidate's family had been noble for at least 300 years. Many of the descendants who followed James II into exile at the court of Saint-Germain in France looked for coats of arms and attested pedigrees as evidence of their noblesse. James Terry, who's the Athlone pursuivant at the Office of Arms, actually fled to France, taking the seal of office and a number of documents with him. And he continued to issue grants and certificates of arms to many Jacobite exiles, along with a number of scholars, including Charles Linnegar and Roger O'Farrell. With Terry's death in 1725 and the decline of the Stuart court in exile after 1745, emigres needed a new source of proof of their status, and the number of registered pedigrees for Irish emigres increased steadily throughout the 18th century, particularly after the 1840s. The series of registered pedigrees in the office continues to the 1940s and covers both Gaelic and Anglo-Irish families. So the pedigrees are in, along with many other documents in the Genealogical Office collections, they're in a variety of styles, from certificates with a full kind of narrative text. There's some pedigree charts, there's some coloured pedigrees, there's some transcripts of patents, there's some in Latin, some in English, so it's anything and everything. But they're a brilliant source for researching the wild geese, basically. So this is an example. It's quite difficult to read actually, but I'll just tell you. So it's a certificate issued by William Hawkins, who was Ulster King of Arms, 1773, to a Captain Barry of the Regiment of Bavaria in the French service, recording that Garrett is descended from Edmund Barry and his wife Eleanor. So Eleanor was the daughter of James Butler, Baron Dunboyne, And Edmund Barry himself is the fourth son of James Barry, who was Viscount Butmont, title created in 1561. So I'd be interested to know if this met the criteria for to continue his career. This is another registered pedigree. I just really wanted to show, I suppose, the variety of items within this series. So it's a registered pedigree of the Earls of Thomond. It's quite detailed. There is a note, that narrative piece, or the textual piece in the middle, to say that Donogh, the second Earl of Thomond, was actually murdered by his brother because he had took the Earldom of Thomond and had entailed it on his male heirs. However, it all turned out, I think, quite happily in the end, because his son and grandson did actually inherit, and then it passed to a cousin. It's an example from an Anglo-Irish family, so Lee of East Hall in Chester. It starts in about the 14th century and goes up to the 18th century. And some members of the family, for example Thomas Lee, was actually killed in Ireland in 1637, and then his descendants settled in Dublin, Louth and Meath, and one of his grandsons was actually killed at the siege of Drogheda. So that's all recorded in this pedigree. In addition to their armorial and genealogical duties, the Ulster King of Arms, as an officer of the Crown, also played an important role connected with Crown administration in Ireland. So from 1698, Ulster kept an official list of Irish peers. So Irish peers who were entitled to sit in the Irish House of Lords, and then after the Act of Union, Irish peers who were entitled to sit as representative peers for Ireland in the House of Lords in Westminster. Before a new peer could be admitted, either on the basis of the creation of a new peerage or by succession, because he followed someone who died, he had to provide information on the title, the family history and the arms. So these are a record, these records form a series called the Lord's Entries, and the importance of these records, I suppose, is that they continue in an unbroken line right up to 1939. You'll find quite a few, even during the 1920s, so after partition and so on, the office still continued to grant arms from the Crown, and that only changed in 1943 when it passed to the Irish state. So the second set of records in this series are baronets' records, really established to correct and prevent abuses in baronets, people claiming that they were barons when they weren't, and so on. Starting in 1789, records go up to about the 1810s. Again, they vary in their content. They can contain a transcription of the original patent with a pedigree and the arms. This is quite an early one. It's Sir Anthony Brabazon Baronet, and you have the text of his patent making him a baronet, and then his arms there. And then there's actually, the next page is actually a pedigree chart, but it only has him filled in. I'm going to show you another kind of much later example. So it's a very famous family, and I was interested to see that Constance Markievicz and her sister Eve Gore-Booth were both in this. So this is the baronet records of the Gore-Booth family. The most important, I would say, and most valuable collection of records in the office, and which we continue, is the collection of grants and confirmations of arms. So while arms were granted from the founding of the office, our register of grants and arms only begins in about the 1690s, but it does continue to the present day, and we still issue and grant grants of arms and confirmations. Because arms are hereditary, they tend to contain genealogical information on the grantee, particularly in the case of confirmations. Confirmations are where there is no record of the original grant, but a person can show that arms have been in use by his family for 3 generations, and they tend to contain a lot more information than just a normal grant. So next couple of slides will show some images of different grants. So these are 2 images from the earliest books, and you'll see how they differ from the later images. So the image on the left is actually the very first page that we have in GOMS 103, which is the first book that we have. So you can see they have, they're just drawings of the arms, with then the name of the grantee and the date, and then some of them have a little bit more genealogical information. And then the one on the right hand side, again, colour with some more information on the grantee and the date of the grant. But you can see how, when I said that Norman heraldry, or from the evolution of heraldry, was quite simple, and now you can see it evolving, and there's quite a lot of devices in use, and quite a lot of colours in use, and symbols in use, and so on. This is a really nice document. It is it's John Petty. So it's a record of a grant of arms to John Petty, who's Baron Dunkerran and Viscount Fitzmaurice, and it shows the quartering. So you can see on the shield, you can actually see that the first and fourth quarters are Fitzmaurice, and the other two are Petty. And he was the second son of Thomas Fitzmaurice, Earl of Kerry, and his mother was a daughter of William Petty. So, well, daughter and sole heir, so he was entitled to quarter the Petty arms with the arms of Fitzmaurice. Now, this I suppose shows you the evolution of the records that were kept at the office. So William Beetham really put the record keeping in the office on a sound footing, and you can see it in terms of the records that were kept, and I suppose particularly in his own genealogical research and so on. So this is an example from one of the sort of early 19th century grant books. So you can see, you know immediately that it's a grant to a woman because of the lozenge. It's actually quite a lot of I won't read the story out, but suffice to say that it's a grant of arms to a woman called Marianne, who she was Marchioness of Wellesley. She's actually descended from an O'Carroll, who left Ireland and was granted 60,000 acres in Virginia because his estates had been confiscated. And she's now applying, she can prove her lineage, it's all in the document, and now she's applying to bear the O'Carroll arms, and that her heirs will as well. So I suppose it shows you the use that you can make from the information in these grants. This is a grant from Neville Wilkinson, and I really liked this volume in particular because I think you can see sort of arts and crafts movement showing up in the heraldry. A lot of the shields tend to be on their side rather than straight up. And this is a grant, again, you can see quarterings in it. It's actually a grant to a man called Loftus. He was actually a Murphy, changed his name to Loftus because he was inheriting a particular estate, and he has quartered the arms of Loftus with Murphy. And there's quite a long story in that arms as well about how this was taking place and the descent and so on. This is a modern grant of arms, so you can see it doesn't look hugely different from one that was done 100 years ago. So we continue to grant between, I'd say, 12, maybe 10 and 14 a year to issue grants and confirmations and certificates of arms as well. So this is one to a man, Morris Fitzgerald, who lives in Alabama. He's a great-grandson of a man from Fitzgerald from Thurles. So that's documented in the grant text. Most, or I would say a substantial proportion of the applications for a grant of arms that we get are from the diaspora, so mainly people from the US and from Australia. Although Irish, there is, I suppose, a steady proportion of Irish people who apply for grants of arms every year. Right, so now that we've talked about the official records, I just want to spend a few minutes talking about the research material. So material that was collected and generated not because of an official function, but to aid the business of the office. The first one, they're all sort of created by Sir William Beetham, who started this policy. He was Ulster King of Ireland between 1820 and 1853, and he started this policy. He was a genealogist, and he started this policy of gathering in and creating genealogical records, I suppose, to help the office, and that policy was continued by his predecessors. Sometimes you'll pick a volume of Beetham out and you'll find writing from later. You might find, Sadler annotation or so on. So they actually corrected the records as they went on, as well as adding to them. Probably the most important of this research material are Beetham's will abstracts. So they're abstracts from the prerogative wills from 1536 to about 1800. So I know I don't need to tell you about the importance of wills for family historians and the depth and the breadth of information that they can contain. And you also know that wills were administered through the Church of Ireland until about 1857-58. Wills that with estates valued more than £5 and in 2 or more dioceses had to be administered through the prerogative court of the Archbishop of Armagh. What Sir William Beetham did was he looked at the wills and then he abstracted the family information from him. So there are 2 series of records that, one is the notebooks that he did the research in there in the National Archives, but the will abstracts, so this is the abstracted information, you can actually find, we have all those records in the Genealogical Office. Sir Arthur Vickers, who was a later Ulster King of Arms, actually published an index to the wills in the list, and that's quite useful if you're looking for a particular family. I have a close-up here. So this is just an example of the information. They're not pretty, but the information in them you're not going to find, you may not find anywhere else, because the wills were destroyed. So you have a Latin, it's very hard to see because it's actually written, it's annotation Hansel, who married a Jane Alcock, and their children, so you have George, you have Alice, you have Christian, you have Jane, Begnet, which is a name that comes up quite a lot, and Mary, and you have details about who they married. And then you have George, who married Catherine O'Farrell. You have, obviously, her brother was mentioned in the will because you have Ambrose Farrell, who's in as a brother-in-law, and then you have their children. So you have Patrick Latin, you have Ambrose, who was in the Austrian army and was living in Exile in Germany. And then you have Mary, you have Jane, you have Begnet again, and then you have Anne. And all of that information, you can see some of the dates. So you can see Alice Latin will approved 1735. You can see Ambrose Latin will approved 1788. So they're constantly gathering information about the families and looking at all of the family relationships. The last set of records that I want to talk about just very briefly are the other records. So the prerogative wills, will abstracts were taken from a single source. Beetham also compiled 4 other series of records, so created from a number of sources. So the sketch pedigrees, I have an example, Anglo-Irish pedigrees, the pedigrees of Anglo, but I think they're officially called ancient Anglo-Irish pedigrees, so pedigrees of Anglo-Irish families, Milesian families, and Linea Antiqua. Linea Antiqua, I don't know if anybody's familiar with it. They're the genealogies of the Gaelic families, and they were used as source information for Edward MacLyson's book. Yeah, you know that. So you could do a whole other talk on any one of those. And this is an image from the sketch pedigrees. It's actually of Mansfield. I picked Mansfield in Latin because that's a family that from an estate collection that I worked on. That, to my knowledge, is the only record of the Mansfield arms. And there is an entry in Burke's General Armoury to say that those arms were allowed in 1813, but that is the only record of those arms anywhere in the office that I have found so far. So if you're looking for arms relating to a particular family, don't just look in the Grand Series, you need to look in a few other places as well, is what I would say. And then I have a few other, just if you're interested in further reading, the Irish Manuscript Commission Guide to the Genealogical Office, Dublin, 1998 is really good. It reprints an article by John Brennan from Tracing Your Irish Ancestors, I think the first edition, where he talks about the main record sets. And there's also a listing of all the manuscripts. Simple heraldry, cheerfully illustrated, Mihall's O'Camon's Pulpit Book of Irish Heraldry. And then if you're really interested in heraldry, you could look at the General Armoury as well, and that's actually available online. Okay.
Okay, Wilson, thank you very much.